Yeah, no, obviously with it being Safe Gambling Week, I've struggled in the past without being able to gamble safely, I guess. It was something that started out for me at 16, 17 years old. I pretty much lost control of it within the first year or two for different reasons, being involved in professional sport as a footballer, the environment in which I was in. I was a competitive person, so every time that I placed a bet, I wanted to make sure that I won. And obviously with gambling and betting, you can't enable that, you can't ensure that. So for me, it was something that started out as a little bit of fun. It turned into a problem, and then in the latter days, it turned into an addiction. So, no, I think it's important that we highlight the ways in which you can gamble safely. For some people, I know that will be difficult. Some people will be listening to this thinking, well, how are you meant to do that? I'm already in the midst of addiction. And that's where it's important to actually speak out, reach out to someone if you are struggling, and just sort of spread the message and share the problem, I guess. I did that back in 2015 with my parents and just said that I'm struggling, I can't do this anymore. I was in a bit of a bad place mentally, and it enabled me to get back on my own 2 feet and start moving forward again.
So personally, just as you touched on your own experience there, would you mind kind of talking us through how things sort of developed for you?
Yeah, of course. So at 16 years old, I had to move out of my home. I had to move in with a family that supported the football club. And moving into digs, being away from my friends and family, I had a lot of spare time on my hands. It was the first time that I was ever earning money in my career. So I started gambling small amounts of money, which then led me to not being able to afford to get to training. I was getting a walk in the morning. So it had a small impact on my life at the beginning. At 18 years old, I was doing things that I wasn't proud of. I was lying to people important to me about the ways in which I was spending money. I ended up gambling deposit away from my house, which was around £30,000 in 2 weeks. I started to bet on things that I wasn't allowed to bet on in terms of being a professional footballer, because the rules and regulations are obviously there. They're put in place for people to stick to them and to adhere to the rules. But once you're obviously a problem gambler, those rules and regulations go out of the window. I couldn't stop myself from doing it. There were other times where I crashed my car watching a horse race on the phone because I couldn't put my phone down. I needed to sort of have that buzz and be stimulated the whole time. All sorts of different things. Found myself sleeping in my car after training because I couldn't afford to get home, because I put my last pound on a horse race, a dog race. I've slept in my car at the stadium where no one could see me parked. I've slept in service station car parks. I've slept in lay-bys. And then once I'd sort of lost my career as a footballer in 2014, after being involved in the game for 11 years full time, I'd lost my identity and I needed to get some help. So I reached out to my parents after self-harming, knowing that it wasn't the right thing to do. It wasn't the solution to my problems. And I found myself entering rehab for 26 days in July 2015, where it was probably the biggest accomplishment, I guess, of my life, because during those 26 days, it led me to understand the reasons why I gambled. It led me to understand what I did and how I treated people, which I wasn't proud of. It completely stripped me my values, my morals and my principles that were instilled in me from a young age, and they were good values and morals and principles. I had a good upbringing from my parents. And in the end, when I did come out of rehab, touch wood to this day, I've steered clear from a bet, and I knew that I needed to do that in order to sort of get my life back on track, because I was heading in the direction that, God forbid, if I didn't reach out, I don't know where I would have been to this day.
So from your experience, then, what would be your top tips for people for gambling responsibly, if they did want to do that?
Yeah, the one thing that I always think is important is obviously setting limits. You've got your calling off periods. You can track your ups and your downs and things like that now, which back then when I was gambling online, they were unheard of. And I know now from speaking to friends and things that they've reached out to me and said, Scott, I think I might be gambling too much. I think it's important also to have clarity with people that are in and around you. My parents tried to stay on top of how much money I was spending, tried to stay on top of my finances and the bills that were going in and out of my account. But the first bill that I wanted to pay every month was that one to the bookies. I was willing to pay all of those bills to the bookies, and I wasn't willing to pay my car, my mortgage eventually when I moved into a house. So one thing I would say is those calling off periods are so important, and setting limits are so important, and only bet with the disposable income that you've got. I think it's great to see now that you can no longer bet on credit cards. But the one thing that I seen a couple of weeks ago on Twitter is that you can now bet on Klarna with some bookmakers. And for me, that's absolutely horrendous way to do it, because I know how important it is to people that they've got these measures in place to make sure that they stay on the right side of caution. But for me, yeah, it's like you say, safer gambling week should be safer gambling year. It should happen all the time. It shouldn't just be a week a year where we promote this message. I think it needs to be flooded, because more and more people are struggling with gambling problems and addictions than we've ever seen before. So I think the message needs to be more frequent, more often, and more powerful, to be honest.
On top of that, you mentioned the reaching out to your parents and kind of opening up to them when you were kind of, it was really a last resort. How important is it to be, if you are going to try and gamble responsibly, to be open about what you're doing? So communicating with your close family, so it's not kind of, you know, a sort of a secret thing that some people tend to do.
Yeah, the one thing that I would say is that if you've got nothing to hide, you'll communicate with everyone around you when it comes to gambling, because they can see what's going in and out of your account. They can see how much you're spending. And if it's within your means, if it's responsibly, then you'll happily show them that. The day that people don't want to show you how much money they're spending, how much money they're losing, that's the day that you're probably thinking, do you know what, I might have an issue. I think it's important to ask yourself the question and just sort of find out what your relationship is with gambling. But sometimes for me, what I've realized is that it's only when people sit down, go through their finances, they can track their ups and their downs, that they're spending a lot more money than they realize. And I think that's where doing it online can be so problematic. If you walked into a bookmaker's with £100, that £100 that's in your hand would feel like a lot more money than £100 on a computer screen in the top right hand corner. So that's where I think it's vitally important. I know that safer gambling is something that's on the increase, it's on the rise in terms of customer interactions. People are obviously trying to do their best that they can, but it's so hard to police. And I personally wouldn't like to have that job of trying to do that, because when they're talking to people that may have gambling problems, they are the best liars in the world as well. So they'll always find a will where there's a way to be able to place their next bet, even if the help is right in front of them. And they've got to be willing to stop as well. That's the biggest thing for me, that they have to be willing to stop themselves. You could have operators ring them and say, you've spent X amount of money in the past month. Is it time that you sort of take a break, or we shut your account down? They'll only go elsewhere and find another way to be able to do it, whether that's in a bookmaker's, in a casino, or open up another account online. So I do understand the difficulties, but I've spoken to various different people in the industry that are doing their best. And I think that's what I'm grateful for, because I don't want people going down the same path as what I did.